Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of E-commerce Exchange, the podcast where we discuss all things online retail and marketing. Today we're really pleased to have as our special guest Rand Fishkin. Hi Rand.
Howdy Matt, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And joining us today as well, we've got Lewis, our marketing director at Eastside Co.
Hi.
Lewis. And Will, our head of SEO. How's it going?
We're all good. We've been speaking together all day, Matt. Me, you, and Will.
So I think Rand probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but I will do one because that's traditional. So I've got some Fishkin facts for just anyone who's not familiar with who he is. So Rand is an internationally renowned SEO legend, I would say. Are you happy with that moniker?
That sounds weird. Rand is a guy who internet marketing nerds know about because he appears on videos talking about SEO and web marketing.
You know what? We had this conversation. We had this conversation just before you joined about the fact that we're all quite excited, and this, for us, let's be honest, is a celebrity encounter. Will, especially for Will, because he's specialized in SEO. So this is a little bit of a celebrity encounter.
Absolutely. When Matt first told me, I got so excited.
Yeah. I mean, Matt's having beer to settle his nerves. Will's been bouncing off the walls. I've been largely fine with it, Rand.
I could tell. Yeah. You seem nonplussed.
No, we're so pleased to have you. I mean, Mars, we've all used it for years and years, and that's your certainly a big part of your past. Yeah. And we all read the book Lost and Founder. So hopefully we'll talk a little bit around that. But I suppose you're just coming out of the tail end of your I suppose what's the right words? Your finality of your relationship with Moz. So can you give us just a bit of an idea of everyone knows how Moz was started and what the purpose of that was, but how you've kind of phased out from that and where you're moving into now?
Sure. Yeah. So for folks who aren't familiar, Moz obviously is an SEO software company, but it's a venture-backed company, which means that, initially my mom and I started it. But as it grew and raised money, Moz became sort of run and directed by a board of directors. And that board of directors is set by the documents that are signed and structured from over the course of the venture investments. And so Moz has 2 board seats that I own and control after my mom left. And then each of our outside investors controls a seat on the board, and we have an independent director. This is pretty common, pretty similar structure to a lot of places. Shopify, for example, I think has a 7-person board with, some of their investors, some founders, and then independents, right? Mm-hmm. And in Moz's case, I wrote about this just last weekend, but I was finding over the last few years that due to, I think, some of the conflict and relationships that I had with the leadership team there and the CEO, I was not being an effective board member, and I don't think we were being a very effective board, frankly. I mean, I'm sure all of you have worked in environments where, you have conflict with the people around you. You don't necessarily feel psychologically safe around them. And,
certainly that's the case with Matt and Will. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it's not the case between any of the 3 of you now, right? But like, people have this dynamic sometimes in their families. They don't want to tell their parents or their sibling or their spouse something, and it creates strife and conflict, right? And that those feelings of mistrust, that feeling that you are not being listened to or heard, or that even if you are being heard, your people aren't acting on your input. All those things just create a really negative environment, and that's the kind of situation that I had with Moz's board. And so in May of this year, the Reddit co-founder, Alexis Ohanian, who I think is now most famous for being married to Serena Williams. But Alexis Ohanian stepped down from the Reddit board and, you know, requested that the board replace him. And for some reason, like it clicked in that moment in May, like, oh, I could do that. I could step down from my role. We could, you know, I could urge Moz to sort of fill my seat. And so I had this conversation with the board. They were very supportive. I sent them a list of, I don't remember, you know, 10 or 15 potential board members. And of the first 3, they liked 2. So boom, we were able to make that happen really quickly. So filling my seat on the board of directors at Moz from now on will be Asia Arangio, who you might be familiar with. She's not in e-commerce, but she's a consultant in the software as a service marketing space, and runs Demand Maven, I think out of Atlanta. Very, very impressive, just incredibly smart. If anybody is in software as a service or a founder, I'd urge you to follow her. And then filling the independent seat will be Tara Reid, who ran Apps Without Code. And Tara is so amazing. Like, I'm sure you guys remember, you know, 5 years ago, people were like, that'll never happen. You can't build a startup without being technical. Like this codeless world is not real. And now no code is huge. And Tara was like one of the first people to see it coming. And she's, you know, she's written about her sort of journey to making 7 figures and like building this incredibly impressive business, bootstrapped, like no funding. So I'm excited to have them on the board, and I'm very excited to get to focus on SparkToro and not, you know, not deal with an environment where I don't feel valued.
Yeah, of course. And, you know, we don't want to, you know, we understand Moz is, you know, it's always going to be a part of what you do. And inevitably, whenever you come on these things, people are going to mention Moz. I mean, I suppose there's lots and lots of situations, certainly in American tech startup world, Silicon Valley tech startup world, where founders are no longer part of the business. I think what you talked about quite a lot in Lost and Founder was the much less tangible side of that, and the much more emotional side of going through a startup and some of your successes, and you were very, very open about some of your that you felt within the business. I mean, how does it feel? Does it feel like it's always going to be something that is a part of you, or, you know, how does it feel to be outside of a business that you created?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a strange thing. I think that for many folks, you know, who start a business and run it for a few years and then leave, especially leave on sort of their own terms in the way that they expected, it doesn't feel particularly strange. I have lots of friends, for example, in the agency world, marketing agency world, and they, you know, start an agency, run it for a while, one of their partners takes it over, or someone buys it, whatever, right? And I don't think that they feel particularly strange about that. What's odd about Moz is, you know, it's a family business, right? It started with my mom. My grandfather, Seymour, was like a big part of Moz's very early days. I don't know if, that was in Lost and Founder too, right? Like he went with me to my first conferences and like helped me decipher the PageRank paper because I didn't know what the hell was going on with the math back in the day. And this was, you know, this is the kind of thing that like today you're like, do you have to get the math of PageRank? Is that important? No. But, you know, in 2002, we were sort of like, oh, this feels important. We should understand this. And the, you know, the reality is that after, what was I there for? 17 years? Yeah, you feel kind of attached, right? Yeah. That's like, that's basically the time frame that parents have with their kids. Almost exactly. So yeah, there's a sense of attachment. I think the last couple of years have been really good in terms of, I have never been professionally happier. Like I love the way we're building, Casey and I are building SparkToro. I love what the company does. I feel it feels more in alignment with all the things that I want to do kind of personally and professionally and for the world and for sort of the macroeconomic picture and for the marketing world, right? Like not to disparage, Will, any of your work or the SEO world, but like I love SEO. I think it's really cool. I also think it is becoming increasingly clear to me that Google is taking more and more of the opportunity for themselves and they are being less and less of a good partner to publishers and creators and marketers in all sorts of ways. And I would like to at least contribute my professional efforts to a world where Google holds less power, not more. So that really fits with what I'm trying to do. I think that helps me kind of, whatever it is, get over the transition and get excited about the new work I'm doing.
I suppose that was a big part of Mars was transparency, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and
which kind of came to, in a way to bite us. I don't know if you guys watch this, but like in the SEO world, there's sort of this weird thing where like, things aren't true, but you don't talk about them publicly because Google's representatives don't like you talking about them, and you create conflict with them. And in order to, like, whatever it is, get clients or appear to be a good player in the world, you want to take Google's side.
Yeah,
it's a very strange industry in that front.
I suppose for you or for Mars or SEMrush or Ahrefs or any of these guys that are dealing maybe with Google on a much more direct or a much more kind of like, we're a partner, we're dependent on you for feeds, we're dependent on you for information and data. There's obviously huge conflict there in terms of, you're obviously very, very transparent about what you do, and maybe that causes friction with Google. I mean, for us, I suppose, Will, you'll be able to talk around this a little bit more, but we're playing the game on the very much the client end of the scale, right? So we're using tools like Mars and Ahrefs sure. and various other things. I mean, Will, how do you see it in terms of the landscape at the moment, and based on some of the stuff that Rand's talking about?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Rand, to mention Google and its power. And because earlier before this call, me and Matt were discussing your recent post about no-click searches and the really diminishing organic real estate on the SERPs, and how that has just transformed in the past 5 years, when mobile has become such a dominant force now, and the PPC ads just dominate the over-the-fold screen real estate. And when you bring obviously knowledge panels, snippets, and the organic listings have so much less visibility, and you can see the direction it's going in now, and that is a challenge for websites. So how do you continue to grow organically when the landscape is becoming a lot more challenging?
Yeah.
I mean, we're finding it as well, just to kind of add on that, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, because it leaks into, the paid side, which again is fundamentally Google or Facebook, right? It's, we have situations where we, say brand is going to be a huge thing, right? So we rank organically, position 1 for brand, but we have to make the decision, because so much real estate is taken up. Do we still bid on that term and cannibalize organic, or do we not bid on the term because they should be conversions or traffic that the client is getting for free, right? But Google owns both of those areas, so we don't really have a choice. What's your kind of thoughts on that?
It's the prisoner's dilemma, right? Google is essentially, basically saying like, oh, well, if you don't bid on your own brand name, your competitors will be able to bid and rank there. So you either pay us for traffic that you obviously should be getting and earning, right? Someone who types in your brand name intends to go to your website and learn about you, 99% of the time, but we're going to send you only 80% of those clicks or 70% of those clicks unless you pay us. And that is, that's pretty frustrating. Will, as far as brand goes, so I think you're absolutely right that brand is the answer to how you combat and fight against Google's monopoly domination of web search, and the fact that they are, so powerful and influential in this field. I think that the right thing to want to do is to say, and we've been doing this a little bit with SparkToro, right? My goal is not to rank number 1 for audience intelligence, or for market research software, or for, any other particular term. In fact, I do very, very little SEO for SparkToro. My goal instead is get people searching for SparkToro, right? I'm not trying to rank, I'm trying to build the brand. And that is kind of a fundamentally different thing. It's weird because in all the years of my SEO career, I was the opposite. Like I was very much hey, how do we get rankings? What are keywords people are searching for? And I think it was in my later years that I started realizing, oh gosh, I was helping, for example, a local startup here in Seattle called CrowdCow. CrowdCow works with small ranchers, cattle ranchers, and farmers all over the U.S., but pretty heavily here in the Northwest. And they, hopefully, you guys aren't vegan or vegetarian.
You know what? It's usually me that brings it up, Ran. As a vegan, I do usually bring it up within the first 5 minutes of any conversation. But you know what? If you're going to talk about the needless slaughter of animals, I'm absolutely fine with that in this, this situation.
So these small ranchers are needlessly slaughtering animals when we could all be eating carrots and radishes. But despite this evil, I do, by the way, whenever people have this, it's a total side, but whenever people have that conversation about like, oh, well, what's something that's acceptable today that like 50 years from now will be looked back on as just evil, right? Like we look back on people who were whatever against interracial marriage, and we're like, oh, they were evil. We look back at people who were against, gay marriage, and we're like, oh, that was evil. I think people will in 50 years look back and us be like, those monsters, like they slaughtered animals by the billions.
And I think the ultimate aim is for people to look upon me as some kind of, I don't know, I'm going to say the wrong thing here, some kind of leader of the revolution.
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, at least Lewis was on the right side of... No, I wasn't going to say Jesus.
Princess, you're the Princess Leia. You're the Princess Leia.
That's a good one because she's fictional. There will be a small niche of people that will be very upset that I've said that.
Yeah.
Obviously we've all got the vision of me in a metal bikini attached to...
That's how I was thinking about it. Well, so CrowdCow, right, works with all these ranchers. And there is lots of what I would call latent demand, right? So people like myself who do eat animals and don't love factory farming, right? Yeah. Like for the quality of the meat that you get, for the ethical implications, for the environmental impact. So being able to order from small ranches is a really great thing. But none of them, you guys know the e-commerce world, right? None of them have the infrastructure to work with, go direct to consumer and handle the shipping and handle the marketing and get their websites ranking and blah, 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 blah. So CrowdCow comes along, they start aggregating all these small ranchers all over the US. You can go and order, specialized kinds of meats. I can get the Brazilian picanha that I love, which, that cut was like really unavailable in the US. All these cool things. And CrowdCow, I was working with them, just kind of helping out some friends. It was the guys who started Urban Spoon here, and we'd been friends for a long time. And realizing like, oh, they rapidly built up more demand for the word CrowdCow. You can see it in Google Trends. Then there was demand for buy steak online, or buy chicken online, or buy pork online, or whatever, like all those things. CrowdCow subsumed them. They became bigger than the sum of all the parts. And I had this realization that was such a genius way to go about marketing, that the efforts that they had put in by not by ignoring SEO, but by sort of making it a second tier acquisition channel and making brand primary, they had earned themselves far more search traffic than they could have by ranking number one for a combination of every, search term combined. That I think is the goal of building a brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the question off the back of that is, how easy is that to do? Do you essentially have to choose your? I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy to do.
Is that to do? Not easy. That is so difficult. That is incredibly difficult. But I mean, I think when you're doing that, SEO can be a driver, right? SEO can be a part of the way you build that flywheel to generate that brand. And I think that's actually, you know, when I think about like how do brand and SEO work together, you use SEO and content, and you drift off of the success and the hopeful engagement, trust, loyalty, quality, recognition that you build from the audience who views your content and appreciates it and starts to come to know who you are in order to generate brand. But that is you know, that relies on things like UI and UX and content engagement and email marketing and building up email subscriptions to your content, right? And I think that there's a lot of brands who think about SEO still very, very surface level, right? They're basically like, I want to get traffic from search engines that will click buy the product, you know, they'll add it to the cart, and then I want to see that conversion. And, you know, Will, I want your team to report to me how many search clicks we got and how many of those turned into conversions. And that's what, you know, that's what we expect from you. And I'm assuming, right, I recognize that Eastside might be, you know, more sophisticated in this, but a lot of clients are not, right? A lot of folks in the e-commerce space focus exclusively on that. And I think they need to be thinking longer term about the brand building implications of what they do and how a non-converting search visit can still be incredibly valuable as long as it's building towards brand recognition, brand loyalty, trust, and hopefully a return visit in the future.
So I think sorry, we'll carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I had this debate with clients like all the time, where they want us to really, you know, go for those transactional head terms, and we try and pull them towards the informational long tail terms, which essentially just, you know, make your funnel wider at the top. You know, you can bring, you know, more prospects into that conversion funnel, you know, let them see your brand, become aware of your brand, and then, you know, you can push them towards that purchase journey. And it works time and time again. You know, you create really good, relevant content which isn't trying to, you know, convert them into a customer there and then. Just get them aware of your brand, you know, get them to trust your brand, and then, you know, you get the benefit, you know, later down the line. And I think I can see how you've used that strategy for, you know, SparkToro, because it's been around for a long time before it became actually the paid tool. Because I remember looking at all the free tools you created over the past, is it 2 years now?
So we spent basically the first 18 months, you know, Casey was doing R&D and I'm doing brand marketing.
And of course you have, I suppose, the big thing that you've taken away from Moz is that you are now brand Fishkin as a, you know, you are a brand in essence.
Yeah, like my social following came with me, but I was sort of building the website, right, and domain authority and like all the ranking signals. That stuff, you know, is still relatively challenging, right? I can no longer do what I did at Moz and sort of publish a blog post and expect it to rank in the top 5 for whatever keyword phrase I put out there. And so, to be honest, like a huge part of my marketing intuition and effort has gone toward what I think is now termed digital PR, you know, essentially using other people's platforms to build up brand affinity, to acquire traffic, to get, you know, links, to get sort of content placed, to get, you know, rankings for words and phrases. And those, you know, those include everything from people with powerful YouTube channels to folks like yourself with podcasts to, you know, doing webinars and online events. I was, Will, you probably know, like for the last few years doing lots of in-person events. Obviously that ended in February, but
I think Will might have an interesting story about how he came by a copy of your book, actually, Rand.
Oh, no kidding.
Well, this is Matt laying Will on the line here. Come on, Will, tell the story.
I was at Brighton SEO a few years ago, and I was on the main stage, and at the front there was a table with a sheet on it, and they pulled the sheet off, and there was your book, about, I don't know, 100 copies, and they said just come and get them. So there was a stampede from the stage. Everyone just charged to get these books, and obviously there was far more people than books, and it got quite not heated, but
look, Will's being polite here. He treated it like it was Black Friday at Walmart, and he was fighting people for the book.
I mean, this is not my understanding, right? My understanding of British culture is that people stand in very well organized lines, and they call them queues, and they really enjoy these queues. And if people step out of the queue, you know, then they give the worst thing that you can give in the United Kingdom, which is a stern glare.
Yes, but what you've misunderstood, Rand, is the effect that you've had on the British people. And I tell you, you know, I'm just, it's for your own safety that I think, should you, the next visit you have to an SEO conference, bring your entourage with you, the full Jay-Z kind of security, because there's going to be people like Will. Jay-Z.
You know, I have to say, I have not gotten that, but I do remember that I spent, I think it was almost 2.5 hours signing books in a line at Brighton SEO, because there was just like tons and tons of people, and the next day I had no voice at all because I'd just been talking to people the whole time.
So I think what's interesting about what you've just talked about, and what we often talk to our clients about, is especially in e-commerce, everyone thinks very, very short term. I think in marketing in general, everyone's like, yeah, we really like the long-term stuff, but what we need right now is leads, or what we need right now is sales, or whatever that is. They need all that short-term thing, and then they never quite get around to the long-term thinking. The other thing they do is they don't think strategically, right? So SEO is one tactic in a whole range of different tactics, like you just talked about, that go into building a brand rather than just a short-term sale, right? So, you know, we always talk to people about SEO is a single tactic, and it's a long-term tactic. You know, we think of it in 3, 6, and 12-month terms, and there's various other things that we do for people to drive, you know, shorter-term results, and all of those things kind of lead in together. I suppose one of the interesting things as you kind of move into SparkToro and what you've created there is that you're starting to build that strategic view. I suppose it's still a tactic within the kind of whole mix. So it's probably worth you talking through. We've all kind of been into SparkToro and built various lists and done various things in there. But it'd be really great for people to get an understanding of what the tool does and you know, what the purpose of it. You've talked about it taking power away from bigger platforms and putting it back in the hands of the user, essentially. Like how is it doing that? Right.
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head, right? It is a lot of agencies using SparkToro, and in-house marketers. I think we're about 60% agency consultant, 40% in-house marketers, mostly using it to understand more about where their audiences go online, you know, what websites they visit, what YouTube channels they subscribe to, what podcasts they listen to, what social accounts they follow, and on which channels. And then being able to use that data to go reach their audiences in places where they already engage, whether that is for, you know, sort of brand building purposes or PR purposes, or direct SEO, right? Trying to rank with content that sits on someone else's site, the classic like barnacle SEO strategy, or trying to get a link, right, to come back to your site, trying to get, you know, an advertising sponsorship, right? You might find, in fact, I was one of the most impressive uses I saw, really creative. I had never thought of it before, was someone a couple weeks ago emailed me and was like, oh, I run a podcast, and I looked up our social accounts and I saw which brands our visitors, the people who engage with us, also follow. And then I went and pitched them, and I used the SparkToro data, like I screenshotted it, sent those to those folks and said, hey, you should sponsor our podcast. And I got 2 sponsors. I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, genius. You're so, you know, that's like the inverse of how I think about it, but totally smart. Right. And so basically SparkToro is a search for an audience and instantly find what they read, watch, listen to, follow, engage with.
Right. And like, how did you discover all of these platforms, right, come from, we're trying to solve a problem, or there is a gap in the market, or whatever that is? How did you, what was the thing that made you say, why does this not exist?
Yeah, I mean, this is the weirdest part is marketers have been trying to get this data or doing work to get this data since at least the 1950s, right?
Right.
Like you go back to the Mad Men era, like our job as marketers and ad agencies right before us, they were basically trying to figure out, okay, who's the audience for this product and where can I go and reach them, right? And so if you have the first part of that answered, okay, I know that the audience for whatever this product that I offer online tends to be gardeners and landscape architects and people in that world. All right, so I'm looking for professional gardeners and landscape architects, and I want to find what they pay attention to. And if you don't already know the field, you could spend a few years in it and you sort of get a sixth sense for what's popular and not popular. But even then, right, you might be like, well, I think this publication reaches most of them, but I guess I wouldn't be surprised to find out that there's two other publications that I've heard of that are even bigger, and they reach different parts of the market, whatever it is. That job is incredibly frustrating. And what we saw is a lot of brands paying market research firms literally tens of thousands of dollars to go survey their audiences, right? So they'd use something like Google Surveys or SurveyMonkey or Typeform, right? And they'd try and, maybe like take a big email list, get them to fill it out. That way they design the survey in all these ways. And then they'd ask questions, which, as I'm sure you guys know, there's good questions to ask in surveys. Like there's great data you can get from them. And then there's really bad data you can get. So you ask somebody like, whatever it is, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend the product? Pretty good survey question. You ask somebody, what podcasts do you listen to?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're going to get crap data, right? Maybe they'll put in 2 or 3. They'll probably be like the 2 or 3 most popular podcasts, or the ones they listen to most recently, but they won't necessarily like it. It's just not a great way to go. You ask them, hey, what websites do you visit to learn more about gardening and landscaping?
Yeah.
You're just not going to get great data from that. So we saw early on in SparkToro's journey, we saw a couple of firms do a really smart thing where they took a list of their customers' email addresses and they ran them through Clearbit or Full Contact to get all the social URLs that were associated with those email addresses. Here's whatever it is, right? Well, here's your Twitter, here's your LinkedIn, here's your Facebook page, here's your, Reddit account, here's your YouTube, whatever it is. And then they had like their engineering team build a crawler to go crawl all those social profiles and then aggregate the data together and look at the overlap in what they followed or shared or linked to or replied to or whatever it was, engaged with, which, that's like 6-9 months of engineering, data aggregation, blah, 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 all this work. But they got awesome results. They'd be like, boom, here we go. 24% of our customers follow this website, 22% follow this website, 19% follow this other website, all the way down to like 3-4%. All right, let's go put our ad dollars against those. Let's go take those sites and plug them into the Facebook audience as interests. And now we can advertise more intelligently against them. Okay, let's go pitch, all the podcasts that are associated with these publications and blah, 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 blah. Super smart methodology. But Casey and I were like, come on. Are you kidding me? You probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of engineering time and effort to get one data dump. Like, let's build that for the whole web and make it, whatever it is, like $150 a month, and you can run, tons of searches. And so that's kind of what we did. SparkToro does a pretty darn good job in English language countries right now. So like, you know, Australia, UK, Ireland, US, Canada. And hopefully in the years to come, we'll be expanding into other languages, but it's nice, right? Because it's nice to be able to be aligned on how we help people with how I sort of feel about marketing these days and brand building and being able to identify these opportunities to reach your customers and potential customers outside of just throw money at Google and Facebook.
Yeah, and I mean, I jumped in and you know, created a list of, you know, I think we were saying I hadn't been into, I was aware of the platform for a long time after reading Lost and Founder and you know, following it from there, but only really jumped in prior to this, and was surprised by how quickly, in honesty, even knowing what it does, you know, surprised by the time I got in there how quickly it was for me to kind of produce a list of people that were directly within the niche that I was dealing with, right? It's it's more convenient than I expected it to be.
it is, yeah, it's very convenient. I think for a lot of like content marketers in particular, right? You're a content marketer, you put out a new blog post, and you know, a lot of times if like I blog semi-regularly, and when I do that, I want to find 5 or 10 people who are likely to really appreciate the piece that I'm publishing and have some sort of, you know, relatively sizable audience who will go post it to LinkedIn or share it on Twitter or put it on their Facebook page or, you know, whatever it is, right? Talk about it on their podcast, etc. And if you're regularly producing content, SparkToro is pretty good for this, to be able to be like, oh, okay. Yeah. I was helping, what's his name? Rob Walling, who runs MicroConf, and he had a big survey for SaaS founders that they launched, I think, last week. And I was like, oh, hey, Rob, you know, you're asking me to share the piece. Here's the like 15 other people that SaaS founders follow on Twitter. Let's get them to tweet it too, right? And Rob's like, oh, sweet. Yeah, I'm going to email all them. And boom, right? Like, there you go. Now he's got whatever, 1,500 respondents to his survey versus 200.
Yeah. The great thing for me in there was the tiny little piece of functionality that you could easily miss if you don't watch the intro video, but it's the hidden gems piece, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm really not, we talk about influencer marketing and that kind of thing, and it's an area that we're very kind of wary of, or we're very careful to tread in those waters. But those hidden gems where it's not you're not your million followers, you know, we're much more interested in those micro influencers who have really great engagement, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is how I think in SEO world, right? This is like how a lot of great link building is done. Is you find those sort of small but passionate, influential websites and site owners, whatever it is, bloggers, journalists, news sources, communities, you know, industry publications. And then if you have a good pitch, or if you can, you know, you can pitch a good op-ed or a guest piece, or, you know, you have something that's highly relevant for them, you can do really well, right? You can get those, whatever, response rates at 10, 20, 30% instead of 1%, 0.1% for, you know, a lot of the link builders, like the link building at scale businesses I know out there. When I interviewed those agencies, I was like, wait, you get one response in 1,000?
Yeah.
And you think that's pretty good? That's horrifying.
Yeah. It's definitely a volume game. And you know, again, unless you're kind of set up to do that specific thing at scale, you know, it can be quite difficult. So what does the SEO landscape look like to you now? I mean, in terms of where you think it's at now versus where you think it's going to be, what?
Yeah, so the pandemic has made the SEO landscape a little bit different than I think where it was going previous to that, right? So we see kind of two factors going on there. One is there is far more internet use as people are in quarantine and sort of lockdown, and even people who aren't in quarantine are more, more generally at home, more generally worried about going out. And so the internet is just seeing more use. Google's seeing more use. There's more search. And there's also, in addition to more use, there's less mobile and more desktop.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as you guys know, desktop is where more conversions happen. It's where more click-through rate happens, right? So the sort of last 5 years, 6 years, like you were talking about, Will, of the declining click-through rate, right? And you know, Google pushing stuff down in organic, that is shifting a little bit, right? That this year has been sort of an outlier in that we're seeing a reversal of that trend, right? More people searching, and as a result, click-through rate, more people searching desktop, and as a result, click-through rate on average and in total rising, and more total internet use. So more of that rising. In particular, you know, places that had not adopted e-commerce and web purchasing behavior have in the last 9 months. Like, I mean, very frankly, there's not many better places to be in this economy than in e-commerce, you know, in helping businesses get into e-commerce right now. So you can see and feel that trend in all sorts of ways. How will that change as, you know, potentially vaccines are available and, you know, the whatever governments and the medical community learn how to deal with coronavirus? I can't say, right? I don't know what that looks like. If we return to sort of a true situation like we had 2 years ago or a year ago, in the next year or two, does that trend switch around again? Or is this a period where, you know, such a huge part of the world has adopted e-commerce, has adopted internet habits, that we won't see that switch around again, that it'll just, you know, it's going to stay high. I look at, for example, Italy. I don't know if you've seen the stats on Italy, but like Italian consumers were like the last, you know, they just did not adopt e-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, no, I will not buy whatever, my pasta and my wine online. Like I'm going to the store, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this year has changed that. Yeah. Like this has been the year when Italians have finally adopted web commerce and delivery. You can see Amazon has grown huge there. Mm-hmm. You can see a bunch of producers and new stores. Yeah, it could be that remains the case for a long time. So I think there's never been more opportunity in SEO. And also, if I were a brand, I would work hard on not being exclusively reliant on it. And I would work hard on exactly what you talked about, that double-pronged approach to SEO. The short term, like, yes, let's rank for some keywords that send us some traffic that converts. Mm-hmm. And let's rank for a lot of things that bring us traffic that's likely to, you know, learn about our brand, become loyal to us, subscribe to our content, and be future customers.
Yeah. I think people are starting to see now, and based on what you're just saying, is, you know, we always talk in marketing about don't build your house on rented land. And, you know, for a long time, I think we thought of Google search as not being that. And it's becoming much clearer that it absolutely is now. Mm-hmm. You know, lots of people built their business on Facebook with organic reach, and Facebook did the same thing and just tanked that. So you start paying for it, and it seems like it's going in the same way. But I was saying the other day, I remember the kind of start of Facebook, and I, you know, probably of that generation, just where I moved from MySpace to Facebook and did that. But I can't imagine Facebook not existing, and Instagram, and I can't imagine Google not existing. I can't imagine them not having the power that they do. Is that, you know, do you think that's even a consideration, or do you think that's ever going to be a situation where those guys don't hold significant power, or are we talking decades for that to change?
Let's see. I think Facebook is right now up against a big challenge in terms of its brand perception. Like Facebook has a strong network effect, mm-hmm. but I don't know that there is a more hated brand that we all use regularly.
It's because
right?
like the bank.
Google, I have my problems with Google, but I believe Google is a net positive for the world, right? I'm going to, they're a company and an organization that in many ways I love their products. I use many of their products. And also I'm a strong critic of their products and their practices. And I think those things go well together. Facebook, on the other hand, it is tough to find a redeeming attribute of that company at all, right? It's very difficult to look at them and say, oh, yeah, you do a lot of good things for the world. I think you see that, you see that in their employment. You are feeling that in their media relations. You're feeling that in sort of the world of politics where, Republicans and Democrats in the United States, for those aren't familiar, those are our two major political parties. They agree on almost nothing, right? There's a very, very high degree of tension between these parties in the US, but they both agree that Facebook is bad and should be regulated. That's a bad place for Facebook to be. So I think very frankly that the next couple of years will really have we'll see whether Facebook can survive the terrible brand perception that it's built up and the sort of, I think almost every consumer who uses it is like, I feel bad about using it. I don't like the company. I wish I used it less. I'm only on there because, whatever it is, my group, my friends are on there. That's where I see baby pictures of my kids, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's that social dilemma thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and talking about the evolution of those platforms, I've become obsessed with the upcoming US election.
Yeah.
With my eyes popping out of my head every day since about April. I don't know what is going to happen in the next 2 weeks, but obviously there was all that controversy in the 2016 election and the part that social media played in that. But we've noticed kind of a difference in behaviour from them in the past couple of months. With tweets being removed and flagged and posts being removed and stuff. I was interested in how that factored in with the evolution of the platforms and whether the arguments around censorship and whether the platforms become publishers and that kind of thing. Yeah, I guess that plays into that.
I mean, it's very, very complex, right? You could see yesterday the FCC, Ajit Pai, who I think is an evil SOB and just terrible for the world. I mean, he's anti-net neutrality. Like nobody except the greediest billionaires are anti-net neutrality. Like net neutrality is a public good. I don't care if you're the most conservative, the most liberal person in the world, like you want net neutrality, but not Ajit Pai. So the FCC yesterday talked about how there's this special code that the Senate passed, I think in the late 90s, called Section 230, which gives essentially immunity from lawsuits and you can't be held liable for the content that is published on your platform if it was published by users, right? If you and I go to Twitter and we post something that is libelous about Will and Lewis, like they can sue us if they can figure out who we are, but they can't sue Twitter, right? And that is very different from, for example, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Guardian publishing a piece by us saying Lewis and Will are terrible guys, like or whatever it is. We accuse them.
I'm getting the message here, Rand. I
don't know. They've been sabotaging our efforts to get small ranchers to send meat around the world. And though, the Guardian or the New York Times can be held liable for that content. And so the interesting thing here is, there's questions about, will Section 230 be held up as law long term? Will the Supreme Court uphold it? What if Donald Trump's new nominee gets in? She's a very, very strange person. We've never had somebody like that on the Supreme Court previously.
She's weird, isn't she? And she sounds like a 10-year-old girl as well. I don't know what's going on with her voice.
Yeah, she's just a very odd one. I mean, in terms of was part of this sort of pseudo offshoot of Catholicism cult religion thing where you're sort of subservient to your husband, and and then all sorts of other strange behaviors, and has no opinion on climate change and isn't familiar with it. Like, it's just really weird. So, but in any case, right, there's like all these questions in the political sphere around that. And then I think there's also a lot of questions around whether these platforms themselves will be, I don't know, bullied or nervous into, made nervous into changing their policies around what they do, right? So I think the 2016 election is a great example where, you know, there was this hacked and leaked email information about Hillary Clinton, which ended up being nothing but like the salaciousness of the idea of hacked emails, you know, and the issue essentially became the insecurity of Clinton's home email server. And like, I don't know how that makes you not eligible to be president, but regardless, that became a big issue at the very end of the 2016 election. And now the platforms are sort of like, oh, maybe we should limit the spread of hacked and leaked content. And so, was it yesterday, the day before, there was like a big, the New York Post was running this story, very unconfirmed, right? New York Post is a tabloid publisher here in the US. And there was all these questions about like, well, Twitter limited people from being able to share that post. Facebook limited the spread of it. YouTube semi-limited the spread of that information. There's been limits on conspiracy theories like the QAnon folks. This is the one where Hillary Clinton and Tom Hanks and Bill Gates run a pizza dungeon, and then they like drink the blood of children, and Donald Trump is like going to expose them in some sort of weird civil war. So but that's a very popular conspiracy theory, oddly enough. And I think, if I understand correctly, there's lizard people involved also.
Oh, we've had lizard people here for years.
Yeah. I think our queen's a lizard, isn't she?
Apparently, yeah.
Oh, I think the queen is involved.
She's the head lizard. Yeah, she's the queen of lizards.
and Colonel Sanders from Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yeah, he's banned for lots of other reasons.
But so, right, like, you know, the question is, do these platforms have a responsibility societally and then legally to limit the spread of misinformation? And you know, I think for a lot of folks, this is going to be, or for a lot of reasons, this will determine a bunch of their future relative influence. So one of the things that's interesting to imagine is a future in which they are held liable for the content that's posted to them. And so they become much more like mainstream media actors 10, 15, 20 years ago, where they publish only reliable information. And then the question is, does that make it such that people no longer consume this sort of misinformation, disinformation, because it doesn't have the viral spread capacity? Or do all these little communities pop up all over the web? You know, your whatever 8chan hosted in Russia and like, you know, blah, 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 right? All that kind of stuff. And I don't know the answer to that.
I think
it could be the case that
around truth versus, you know, objective truth, like, you know, versus
alternative,
you know,
facts.
I mean it in terms of there is, you know, who a person is on Instagram is not who they are. Like, you know, is somebody renting out a grounded airliner to sit on, like they're in a private jet and pretending that they're living that life? Is that,
you guys saw that, right? That
you're always flying, you're always on that jet, Rand.
Oh, that was the weirdest thing. They were asking, what was it? They were asking, like, it was a survey of influencers, and they were like, oh, what are your marketing goals, or what are your like biggest goals for the next year? And like some 20% of influencers said their biggest goal was to be photographed in a private plane.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I had this like, what?
Yeah.
Why? Who cares? What does that do for you?
It's
so strange.
It is very odd. And and I've crossed it off my list now. So
good work.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, we talked a bit about Facebook, and Will, correct me if I'm wrong here. Google now, if you go onto Google search, you and I sit on Google search at the same time, and we type in Donald Trump is, for example, the autocomplete for the both of us is going to be very, very different potentially, because I know you're a big fan of Trump, Will, versus, and the search results themselves are going to be very different, right? That's correct.
Yeah, I think obviously if it's localized, if it's the device you're on, I'm not sure how much search history actually affects the search results anymore, but it definitely affects the autocomplete. But I know the autocomplete is also, I think there's a post yesterday by Danny Sullivan at Google where he talked about this.
Yeah.
And it uses obviously machine learning to look at searches from other people to try and predict what it thinks you're looking for. So I think there's a lot of like machine learning that goes into the autocomplete.
I mean, does that concern you guys in terms of, there's been a few people that have put machine learning bots or AI bots out there, and they've become very, very racist very, very quickly. Because the internet. Surely that is a concern of everyone and of Google? I mean, my question was going to be around, is Google just creating an echo chamber by which, for you guys, for example, Republicans just become more and more Republican, and liberals become more and more liberal? Is that what Google's doing? Is it creating an echo chamber for people, and does it have a responsibility to be a bit more objective?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the challenge anytime you have algorithms that optimize for engagement and virality, right? So you get more polarization and more extremism, because extreme content, whether you believe in sort of this, liberal conservative spectrum, which I personally don't, right? I think the spectrum goes in all different directions. I think it's far more than two-dimensional, but extremist content does very well in an algorithmic engagement way, because no matter whether you believe it or don't believe it, it is salacious and interesting and weird and hard to comprehend, and therefore earns eyeballs and clicks in sharing and outrage and all those kinds of things, right? And those are because it is high emotion, high contentiousness content, it's going to do well on the web. And so, this is one of the temptations, right? And the challenges that we all have as content creators and as marketers. I know, for example, I can guarantee that, if I put out a blog post and the blog post title is Q4 data on search click-through rates in Google. It'll do okay, right? People will read it. It'll get some. If I put out a blog post that says less than half of all Google searches now result in a click, boom, right? Top of hacker news. Everybody's talking about it. People are quoting it in Congress, like da 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 da. Now, what's my responsibility, right? Is my responsibility to make that content less salacious and clickbaity? It's not quite clickbaity, but click enticing. I think that's right at the sort of edge of, well, it's true, it's factual, it's a sexier way to sort of write the same title. I know it's going to earn more engagement. I think that's good marketing. But if I step just over that line into the sort of Google's monopoly now violates American law, and here's the proof. That's definitely clickbaity and probably crossing that line of accuracy into opinion and blah, blah, blah. So I think this is a tough thing for publishers and marketers to make those decisions about where they draw the line. And it's also tough for the platforms to decide, how do we build up machine learning systems that potentially optimize for healthy engagement instead of all engagement?
Yeah. And I think
on this subject round, on machine learning, and obviously RankBrain and BERT are like big things in SEO now. And earlier you mentioned how SparkToro, you don't really do SEO. You just you created a great product, great content, and just let it do its own thing. So do you sort of think SEO is moving towards a direction where it doesn't, you don't need to optimize your site, you know, rank brain, but as long as you create good, authentic, honest content, is that almost going to be enough to rank?
I don't think so. No, I think there will always be, I think there will always be a lot of value in learning what people search for, and then understanding the intent behind those searches and serving that intent with content, and then optimizing, you know, sort of technical and content things on websites, and optimizing the distribution path and opportunities. I cannot see a future, Will, where Google can figure all that stuff out on its own. And I also can't see a future where if you create content without first thinking about the searcher, what they've searched for and their intent behind it and what problems they want to solve, you're not going to end up like, you'll end up accidentally ranking for a few things and most of the things you won't, right? So I think there will always be value in making those investments. I don't see SEO going anywhere. It is going to be around for a very long time. You know, I'm not, I've been around long enough to hear a million people, you know, predict the death of SEO. I don't believe it one bit.
Unfortunately, directly after Rand confirmed that SEO isn't in fact dead, he had to shoot off to his next meeting, but not before he said this.
I could talk to you guys all night. This is like getting together at the pub, and I feel like I just want to, you know, go back to Brighton and hop into a little dark bar and grab a seat and shoot the shit all evening. But oh well. All right.
Obviously, we were incredibly grateful for Rand's time, but it did mean we didn't get a chance to go through how you might be able to find out more about what he's doing. So if you'd like to find out more about what Rand's up to at the moment, or give SparkToro a try, which we highly recommend, it's a really great tool and there's a superb free plan on there that you can give a go, just head to SparkToro.com. That's SparkToro.com. And of course, if you want to find out more about Eastside Co and the work we're doing on Shopify or in e-commerce in general, then just head to eastsideco.com. You can see our portfolio, our clients, and just hit the contact button if you've got any questions or you want to get in touch. Thanks so much for listening. Please do share this with as many people as you can. We think it was a really insightful conversation with Rand, and we'd really love to get this out to as many people as we possibly can. Thanks for listening.